are indeed watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side Live. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, and unfortunately this week I am here by myself. My co-host Rania Khalek not going to be with us. We're going to have a tighter show today. We're going to go for an hour, but I guess maybe unfortunately isn't the right thing to say. Rania is on a reporting trip in Cuba. Many of you may have seen on our @BT Newsroom social media some of the photos and at least one video that have been put out by Rania and our team there in Cuba. So she will be back with us, I believe, next week, and also back with us with a lot of fantastic content that they're getting down there. So just me here today, Rania back with us on the next show, but very happy to have you here on the Freedom Side. And we've got a great show for you here today. This is the 1-year anniversary of Biden's inauguration. So we're going to talk to Dr. Jodi Dean about 1 year of Biden and what that means. We're going to be talking about the case of a internet freedom activist, Ola Bini in Ecuador, who's been targeted because of at least alleged connections to WikiLeaks. And we're also going to be talking to Stacy Davis Gates from the Chicago Teachers Union about many things going on with public education and, of course, the COVID crisis. So this would be a great time for you to make sure you hit that share button wherever you may be watching, so whoever's following you can follow us. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, this is a great opportunity to hit subscribe and also hit the bell. So subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you get the alerts so you can get all of the fantastic content that we are putting out here at Breakthrough News. You won't even need to go look for it. We do have with us this week Juan in the booth. Juan, you're back. Last week you were gone. Welcome.
I was here.
I mean, you were here. There are those who felt that perhaps, we had downgraded your status, that perhaps you gotten too rebellious in the booth and we taken the camera away. But no, you are here. Doors wide open. You aren't trapped. But good to have you back.
Yeah, I learned my lesson.
Juan, one of the things I wanted to just get your take on real quick and talk about is there's a campaign ad that's sweeping the nation by Gary Chambers, a Democratic candidate for Senate in Louisiana, around the war on drugs. But before we get to the ad that is sweeping the nation, Juan, for those who don't know who Gary Chambers is, a couple years ago, 2020 actually, he went viral on the internet when he stood up in a town hall meeting to demand that a statue of Robert E. Lee be taken down. And let's just show a little bit of that clip that went viral then.
Next.
So I had intended to get up here and talk about how racist Robert E. Lee was, but I'm going to talk about you, Connie, sitting over there shopping while we talking about Robert E. Lee. This is a picture of you shopping while we talking about racism and history in this country. Only white members of this board got up while we were up here talking too, because you don't give a damn, and it's clear. But I'm going to tell you what the slaves, my ancestors, said about Robert E. Lee, since you don't know history, sister. Let me tell you that they said when he got the plantation, after he got off the field where 27,000 people died at Gettysburg, Connie, Robert E. Lee was a brutal slave master. Not only did when he whooped the slaves, he said, lay it on them hard. After he said, lay it on them hard, he said, put brine on them so it'll burn them. That's what Robert E. Lee did. And you set your arrogant self in here and sit on there shopping while the pain and the hurt of the people of this community is on display, because you don't give a damn and you should resign. You should have resigned 2 years ago when you choked a white man in his house. You should have resigned 2 weeks ago when you got on TV and said foolishness. And you should walk out of here and resign and never come back, because you are the example of racism in this community. You are horrible. Now to the rest of the board.
So that's Gary Chambers. So before we get into it now, Gary Chambers, who's running for Senate in the state of Louisiana, I believe he's from Baton Rouge originally, has now dropped this ad this week that has made a lot of waves.
Every 37 seconds, someone is arrested for possession of marijuana. Since 2010, State and local police have arrested an estimated 7.3 million Americans for violating marijuana laws, over half of all drug arrests. Black people are 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana laws than white people. States waste $3.7 billion enforcing marijuana laws every year. Most of the people police are arresting aren't dealers, but rather people with small amounts of pot, just like me. I'm Gary Chambers, and I'm running for the U.S. Senate, and I approve this message.
Well, Juan, the campaign has confirmed that was real weed. It's quite a way to make a statement there. What'd you think about that?
I think the statement wasn't the weed, it was like the backwoods. Like,
I definitely was like, is my man smoking a backwood? Like when I first saw it, I was just scrolling through Twitter and I was like, wait, what? But yeah, that's a powerful statement.
No, but more seriously, like in the last years since the uprising, like everybody wants to talk about like representation, diversity, and it's a lot of times a gimmick, right? But you see him talking to the that's the school board, right? Because he was talking about changing the name of the school in that first clip. But like this is what representation really looks like, right? It's not about like Cynthia Nixon talking about how weed like marijuana arrests affects black community, but it's actually somebody who partakes and somebody who is affected by these laws. Right, I think we need more people like Gary Chambers to stir things up, because the truth is, like, there's a lot of like mirage. There's a lot of acting that happens in politics and the way that people represent themselves to a broader audience. The old kissing the baby on the forehead thing, and like we need less kissing babies on foreheads and more people smoking backwoods.
No, I hear you, and I think that is 100% correct. I mean, people have to find creative ways to get this into the content, to the discourse. And, we'll talk about this later in the show, 1 year of Biden, but it's worth noting, and so many people have been commenting on this ad. Biden said that he was going to deschedule marijuana from a Schedule I drug, which would do many things, but essentially would make it a lot easier for to void a lot of these laws for this minor level marijuana possession, and yet they have not done it. So I think this is a good example of what you're saying, Juan, that that real representation is actually people talking about things that are going to help the communities they claim to be serving. And anyone who knows anything about Louisiana knows that the war on drugs there, just the overall criminal legal system is just unbelievably discriminatory, extremely harsh, and certainly anyone I think with experience with that, I could see why they'd want to do it. So we'll see how Gary Chambers does in this election. He ran for Congress last year. Or maybe that was in 2022, did not get out of the primary, but here he is running for U.S. Senate Louisiana and starting a conversation. But I want to just move forward with the show here. We've got a packed show, and of course, don't forget to hit that share button so whoever's following you can follow us. But obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic, everything that's happening with the public schools in relation to it is still a major topic dominating so much of what many people, tens of millions of parents and students and teachers are experiencing on a day in, day out basis. So to continue that conversation, we want to and are very honored. Wait, hold on. We're going to be in just 1 second, just a little technical issues here. But, what I will say to just harken back to the last conversation, as it were, is, it's going to be interesting to see, I think, in the context of the midterms, how much some of these more progressive policies or how they do play out, with the idea being that this is only going to be a reactionary political period. But I think we might be ready with our next guest. Okay, perfect. Got a great tech team. I got a thumbs up in here with that. Very honored to be joined here by Stacy Davis Gates, who's the Executive Vice President of the Chicago Teachers Union. Ms. Gates, thank you so much for being with us. Oh, you might be muted.
I'm so sorry. How are you? And thank you for having me.
Don't apologize. It's all good. This is the world we live in now, muting, unmuting, all of that. Thank you so much for being with us. And well, there's so many things I want to ask you, but let me start here. I saw yesterday the Chicago Public Schools officials were, patting themselves on the back about how they've improved the situation in the schools, how it's going to be a lot safer because of the actions they've taken. And that just felt like an interesting narrative to me, given where we started off the year there in Chicago, where it seemed they had not, in fact, taken the proper safety precautions. So from a CTU perspective, how did you all feel watching that press conference?
Well, from our perspective, it's just another long line of offensive behaviors from the boss, in that they never had a plan. And the only plan to implement mitigations, provide infrastructure and resources for safety have come from our struggle, sacrifice to obtain MOAs or a safety agreement for schools to have some sort of stability. But it's consistent. So, I'm not surprised. The offense remains, but I'm not surprised. And I'm glad they actually said these things out loud, because now people understand that there was a struggle and these are the results of the struggle as verified by the boss. Now, they don't have to say our name. All of Chicago, all of this country understand or understood what we were fighting for. We wanted mitigations there. We wanted testing increase. We wanted to ensure safety as best as we can in a pandemic. And now we're seeing them say, these are the things that are in place. And that is directly tied to the action our members took.
I'm glad you made that point about the actions of the members and the struggle that you guys are waging, because it just feels for me, even outside of COVID, this is almost par for the course. I mean, certainly with CPS, but I think we see this around the country that, whether we're talking about COVID mitigation, the availability of the appropriate staff and services in schools, that it really is teachers who are fighting for quality public education in this country. And it just seems like I don't know, what we're seeing with COVID isn't necessarily unique, but it speaks to how public education is so devalued by so many officials in this country.
Devalued, disinvested in, determined by those who have the least impact. So yes, all of that. COVID has exacerbated all of the things that you enumerated, and that those who didn't have previously are still struggling to have now. Those voices that are routinely ignored and pretty much placed on mute pre-COVID are the same ones that are being placed on mute now. This leveraging of the trauma of poverty and racism, white supremacy and patriarchy in this moment is being manipulated. So we're dealing with the same. The difference is this time, though, is that we have people who need tremendously more support than they've been given previously, because people are literally dying. Like, this work in this moment is about survival. One of the things that I've been going back and forth with colleagues and members about is this concept of wins and losses, in these agreements. In the labor movement, we say we won this. And I go, that is so inappropriate in this moment to talk about this as wins and losses. For a win to be my survival, that is lowering the bar for a win tremendously, because the only thing that we are putting into place is the bare minimum to increase the likelihood of survival for all of the members of the school community and the families that they go back home to.
I mean, it's hard to even imagine, I think, especially for people who either don't have kids or who aren't teachers, what the just mentality is in the classroom here. And I know that we've seen, in Chicago, students walk out and also protest for better conditions. I mean, give us a sense of, what's the level of fear? What's the level of stress? Obviously schools, there's a lot there. It's a tough job, and it's tough to be a high school student or a middle school student. But in this COVID crisis, how much worse is it?
I think that people have demonstrated how anxious they are. how angry they are that government is failing them in this moment. Our school district is run by the mayor of Chicago, and the mayor of Chicago has failed to put the billions of dollars that Joe Biden sent Chicago to secure our school communities and to stabilize them. Um, Honestly, last Friday, the student action was beyond compelling because we often levy children and students and black and brown children and students in debates. And the fact of the matter is that they actually get to talk too. They're having a real impact and experience because of the conversations and the debates and the struggles that adults are engaged in. And they don't have a seat at the table. And so they have assessed accurately, I may add, that if in fact it is for us, then we should be there, and our demands should be front and center, beyond your own demands. We think we are providing amplification for those needs, and that's fine, but they should have the microphone first to clarify their needs. And I think they did. I think that they were eloquent, they were clear, they were specific. It was very tough watching them. As a high school history teacher, I took a lot of pride in their leadership, in their clarity, and their courage. And as a grown up, as a parent, I feel like a failure that our children have to take such massive, um, sharp action, to save their own lives. That is a failure of adulthood right now.
Mm-hmm. And I think one question a lot of people have is sort of, how do we continue to move the ball forward here and get out of just a purely emergency situation? I mean, it's, there's a lot of triage going on to get folks back in the classroom, but how do we strengthen the school environment and the broader public education system, both vis-a-vis the pandemic and in general, so we're not continually being hit in such a terrible way when crisis strikes, and then when crisis isn't striking in, essentially a totally under-resourced system?
Look, that's a big question, and it's one that we are obviously struggling with here in Chicago. They're doing it struggling in New York. They're doing some good things in LA. They're struggling in Oakland. They're struggling in Boston. They're struggling, across this country. And not so ironically, these are the places that are struggling because of generational disinvestment, generational impacts of racism and institutional racism. I think what we have to do, one, is take a deep breath and reassert our commitment to making it work. Clarify what's necessary to make it work, and take roles in making that happen. But that's going to take leadership. And in so many of these cases, you have folks who are not listening to everyone, right? So if you watch any of the coverage about school reopening, they don't look like me. And I have 3 children who attend the Chicago public schools. They don't look like my Latina sister, right? They look like a particular individual, and that is the parent perspective. And that is not the parent perspective. What we've understood from polling for the last 2 years is that parents of color, families of color, prioritize the safety of their children over reopening. They do want to reopen, and they want to do it safely. So that is completely in line with what we've been saying. But you can't hear that if you go and get those parents that are not experiencing it in the same way. I think this exercise has also taught us that when it is raining in one place, people don't understand your need for an umbrella because they don't need an umbrella. And that is something that we're grappling with here in Chicago and nationally. One, parent that isn't a default white mother. Parent is all of us. I think part 2, in a school district that is 90% of color, to mute those voices and deprioritize their needs is deeply problematic. And collective bargaining has no place and ensuring safety. And I say this because it should already be there. Your human right to go to work or attend school, be inside of that school community should not be predicated on the union's ability to win mitigations. The mitigation should be there because that's necessary. And so we have turned this paradigm upside down in Chicago, where Chicagoans expect the teachers union to make it make sense, to provide clarity of purpose, clarity of demands, the necessities. We have been really put in a position of being a co-leader of the school district. And we can only do that, though, through the struggles that we've had in 12 and 16 and 19 and 20, 21 and 22. It takes too much to get what we need. The expectation that we get what we need because students walk out of their classrooms and school communities, or that educators take a remote work action at the height of the surge in the city, is unreasonable, it's disrespectful, and it's devaluing. So our city's administration, our mayor, she's got to come to a conclusion that this city needs partners, doesn't need enemies, it doesn't need adversarial relationships, especially in a pandemic.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I really certainly appreciate what is some moral clarity coming from CTU. Stacy Davis Gates, the Executive Vice President of the Chicago Teachers Union. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having us, and take care.
It was our pleasure. Well, obviously a critically important issue, public education in this country. I mean, it just feels like the school system is collapsing in on us, and very few people are doing anything, but it's the teachers unions in a lot of these cities that are fighting for us. And I'll mention UTLA was mentioned. They just put out a very interesting report people might find interesting about how to improve public education coming out of the pandemic, not just from a health and safety perspective, but a broader perspective. So just something to mention there. And certainly something I think everyone should be talking about. But we want to continue to move the ball forward here on the show. And again, there's more here on the show. We're going to have Jodi Dean coming up later talking about Biden's one-year anniversary, I guess you could call it. This is the anniversary of the inauguration in 2021, January 20th. So go ahead and hit that share button wherever you may be watching, so whoever's following you can follow us as the show continues to roll on and move on. And of course, at any time, you can go to patreon.com/breakthrough news and become a patron and help us keep putting this show and all of our great Breakthrough News content out. That's patreon.com/breakthrough news, patreon.com/breakthrough news, and at breakthroughnews.org, our website, you can make a one-time donation. That's at breakthroughnews.org, our website. So become a patron, make a donation. It's all deeply, deeply appreciated. So again, hit that share button, and you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can get the alerts. But moving the movement on, we want to turn our attention to the country of Ecuador, where Ola Bini is on trial and there's a lot to it here. Let me not try to editorialize. We're very happy to be joined by Zoe Alexandra from People's Dispatch, one of the best news outlets out there, and I mean on the planet, not in the United States, not in Latin America, not in Asia, on the planet. Zoe, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thank you so much for that very great praise. Really, really means a lot.
Well, I hope it does. I'll give you a little cheat code for our viewers. The Punch Out podcast that I do every day comes out at 5 p.m. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, and all your podcast areas. I don't know what they all are. Leans very heavily on People's Dispatch. I will not lie. A lot of our great content is only happening because of you guys. So it's not just praise, it's the truth. So let me ask you this. Ola Bini is on trial in Ecuador. That we know. I think for most people who are watching this, it's probably like, well, who is Ola Bini? What is he on trial for? Why is this relevant? So tell us, who is Ola Bini and why is he on trial in Ecuador?
Well, Ola Bini is a Swedish software developer and privacy activist, digital rights activist. He had been living in Ecuador for several years, And on April 19th, the same day that Julian Assange was arrested in the Ecuadorian embassy, Ola Bini was traveling. He was about to travel to Japan for a karate workshop. And he was arrested by unidentified officers in the airport in Quito. They, did not say why they were arresting him. They did not say what charges he was being arrested for. What really this arrest started and what followed was just a series of extreme legal irregularities, violations of due process. Ola Bini is Swedish. She does speak some Spanish, but he asked for a translator, wasn't given a translator. So really on April 19th, the saga essentially continues, this horrible witch hunt against him, persecution, which today, continues. And essentially yesterday, the trial began against him after actual years of getting delayed, getting pushed back, judges being pulled off the case because of political interference. And you're wondering, what was he tried with? So I think that's an important thing to bring up because, of course, that's at the heart of the case. But it is important to say that he was arrested and not really told what he was being charged with. Shortly after his arrest, the Minister of the Interior, Maria Paula Romo, she went on TV saying that they'd arrested Russian hackers that they had been after, that had interfered with the national security of the country. And of course, he was arrested that day. It was quite a public arrest, quite emblematic, being on the same day that Julian Assange was arrested. Obviously, he's not Russian. They were making allegations that he's a hacker, that he had, undermined the security of Ecuador. And then beginning that day, he gets put in detention. Eventually, they reveal that he's going to be charged with attacking the integrity of computer systems. And they essentially there was, of course, a raid on his house where they seized, computers, hard drives, USBs, all of the kind of tools that actually a software developer has. So, if you are a woodworker and you raid the wood shop, there's going to be equipment. And the same thing. So they're showing these, photos on social media, on the TV, saying, look at this guy, he's the hacker. He, did this, did that. Even books that he has about, left politics, those were all used as part of this kind of media trial against him. He's being accused of, accessing computer systems. This has really not been substantiated. They claim, and they've changed their story a bunch of times, they've actually been allowed by the judge to change the charges, change the explanation, and he attempted to break into the national telecommunications, database. But really what this boils down to, and what's, digital rights activists across the world, people who have stood in solidarity with Ola for these past almost 3 years, have said that this is clearly politically motivated. He was friends with Julian Assange, did not work for WikiLeaks, did not, have a professional relationship with him. But of course, we can't start to say that WikiLeaks is illegal. It was an organization that was doing crucial information. He was friends with Julian Assange, knew him, and so essentially, it's trying to show that Ecuador is being hard against these people who dare to think differently. It's been a really unfortunate and very hard case to see, because after 3 months of being detained, Ola Bini was released from prison. He was held in an Ecuadorian prison where he was also denied proper food. He's a vegetarian. He was not given, the food that he needed. So many irregularities, it's actually hard to count. And he was released. And then since then, he's said that it's been like the prison sentence has continued. He has to go every Friday to present himself, show that he hasn't left the country. He has been, he's recorded that there's been surveillance outside of his house 24/7. People who have been working on his defense team have been hacked. One of them has been, under investigation. So it's been a constant harassment, constant violations of his basic rights, as a human, as an activist, as a person. And it's really representative of this, rightward shift of the Ecuadorian government to just persecute those. And, of course, with the Julian Assange, I think this was a clear shift in their policy, which they had given, him asylum for many years. And so that's kind of the long, short summary of Ola Bini and his case and where it stands today.
No, well, thank you so much for that. Very comprehensive, and I think important to grasp all those different realities. I mean, you mentioned it there at the end, but I mean, it does seem that there is a relationship here between the government in Ecuador, its politics, and what happened. Of course, the president at the time, Lenin Moreno, the current president, Guillermo Lasso, very close to the United States. And, Ecuador, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the case. I mean, not only had they given asylum to Julian Assange, but they were holding themselves up as a government that was, friendly to this idea of digital privacy and of an open internet and, pushing back. It's sort of in the vein of what WikiLeaks was trying to bring to the surface here about the positive role the internet can play and not allowing it to just be dominated by corporate giants and, governments and so on and so forth. And now it seems they're sending an exact message. I mean, I know you are not in the Ecuadorian government, so you can't say 100%. But does it feel like even beyond Ecuador that there's a connection between U.S. policy on some of these issues, of course the criminalization of Assange, and what the Ecuadorian government is pushing?
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. I mean, some people have speculated that they thought they were going to be able to get evidence about Assange, and so that's why they were, persecuting Ola. I think they've realized that's a dead end because he, as I mentioned, he was a friend. He did not work with him. He's not going to be someone, they could extract that kind of information from. And I mean, even just looking at the kind of work he was doing in Ecuador, he was just helping young activists come together. They, I think this is very common in the tech activist scene to have crypto meetups, and they discuss open source software. I mean, really basic stuff, sharing information to more people, having a community of people who are working in this field. And yeah, I mean, of course, that's something that's completely antithetical to the U.S. approach to, data privacy, security, software. I mean, it's, the U.S. government loves to have their own privacy about their information, but of course, it wants to have complete access to citizens' information. I think Ola's work helping people protect their own information, personal information, whether it be politically related, whether it just be, not having your personal pictures have, be in the hands of the government. I think that's a really, valid and important work that he was doing to help, people understand what's at stake, understand kind of the encroachment of tech companies and what this means for all of us as citizens of this world. So it's definitely part of this kind of pushback on activists who are just trying to help people understand this, digital space that is constantly changing.
I know that Ola Bini has been getting support from a range of different individuals and organizations, really all around the world. It's actually quite impressive to see. And I know you've been covering this pretty closely, Zoe, all of you at People's Dispatch. What are some of the biggest fears that those who are supporting Ola have in terms of what the implications and the repercussions can be, of his arrest, of his trial, and if he is convicted, of a conviction?
Well, I'll just share a little bit about, so yesterday was the first day of the trial, and I think it kind of points to some of these, what are the possible things that could come out of this? And so yesterday started, there was an expert witness of the prosecution, and essentially this expert witness was going over some of the evidence that, the Ecuadorian state has seized during the raid on Ola's house and, during this whole investigation. This supposedly expert witness was saying, that Ola had books that talked about hacking, that there were videos that maybe referenced this, that there were some photos that, pointed to alleged hacking or, talking about digital things. And I think, that's clear. What they're trying to make a case that if you talk about anything software related, then you are a hacker, you're trying to undermine governments, you're trying to, attack the integrity of computer systems. Anyone who's, at all engaged in this kind of work can just easily be slapped with that label. I think this is extremely worrying, and that's why organizations, like the EFF, Article 9, a lot of kind of liberal NGOs that work with digital privacy have really rallied around this cause because they see it as such a threat to our, right of expression, right to privacy, so many integral things. And it's, it's really unclear. I think at this point, what has been happening throughout the case is that they don't have enough evidence. And so, they're constantly pushing, they're delaying. I think, what's likely to happen is that they keep dragging this out and make the individual Bini, make his surrounding, circle just completely suffer, because already it's almost been 3 years and he's just been in a constant odyssey of, starting, stopping, of, being in prison, out of prison, all of these different kind of ways of just exhausting a person and their dignity. And that's been basically the strategy. They don't have evidence. They can't convict him. There's actually no evidence pointing to this alleged thing that he did. So this is really their best option. Keep dragging it out, keep getting people to say things that are going to drive up media and say, oh, well, he might be a hacker. And it's very unfortunate that they're turning to these means to really, send their message.
It absolutely is unfortunate, and you can see these types of strategies consistently use, sort of a lawfare sort of reality to it. And I mean, what does this say about the current moment in Ecuador too, and the type of government that is there, and certainly the one right before it, which was very similar, that this is happening? I mean, I think many people can remember Ecuador for so many years being one of the beacons of the so-called pink tide in Latin America of governments and people's movements that were trying to change things for the better in their country. So what does this say about where Ecuador is right now?
Well, I think with the, beginning with the Lenin Moreno administration, it's just been a complete setback in terms of rights, in terms of, victories that people's movements won on the streets. It wasn't that Rafael Correa handed a bunch of, things to the Ecuadorian people and he said, okay, here you have some nice things. It was, demands that were brought to the table from people's movements, rewriting the Constitution, which was a process that involved, broad sectors of society. And since Lenin Moreno took office in 2017, there has been a systematic setback against those gains. Guillermo Lasso being elected in, last year, of course, kind of, just further, concretize this. So I think it's a moment of setback. It's a moment of, I think, a lot of the movements trying to figure out how best to take on the government. There were some pretty impressive strikes that took place at the end of last year of CONAIE, which is the largest indigenous confederation in Ecuador. They have been taking to the streets against, further attempts to implement neoliberal policy by Lasso's government. Other organizations have also been mobilizing, students, trade unions. And so I think it's going to be, the next 4 years are going to be, constant struggle and constant trying to push back on these conservative, efforts by the Lasso administration, and hopefully rebuilding the strength that the people's movements once had in Ecuador.
Well, like I said, People's Dispatch is not only covering this case, but covering quite a bit that happens in Latin America and around the world. Where can people find your work?
peoplesdispatch.org and at People's Dispatch on all of the platforms that you may want to look on.
Yeah, that's 100% true, including on YouTube, where I'm very honored to do a weekly 10-minute piece with People's Dispatch. Zoe Alexandra, thank you once again for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, pleasure is all ours. Well, before we move on, my co-host Rania Khalek, I believe, is watching the show. I don't know. I guess is in the chat. I've been told. Do we have that? Can we pull that up? Did she say something? I can't. I'm not in the chat. I'm not looking at it. Sorry for people in the chat who think I'm looking at it. I'm not. It's nothing against you. We don't have it. Someone just told me she's in the chat, so I don't know if that's true. Are you telling me that I should read it? Oh, well, it's not downloading on my computer right now, so it's I don't know what it says. I just know that Rania's in the chat. Well, she's in Havana. That I can tell you. She's in Cuba. She's doing fantastic. She says hello from Havana, apparently. Doing fantastic work there. They've done a lot of interesting things, met a lot of interesting people. She says, don't have too much fun without me. I think that's essentially not possible. It seems like, the things that they're doing and seeing the healthcare system, many of the very impressive social programs, the popular mobilizations, the revolutionary democracy, all of the various elements of Cuba that I think are deeply, deeply impressive and beloved around the world. So they're going to have more fun than us. But we're having fun here. We're enjoying it. But thank you, Rania. She says she misses us. I don't know if she's permanently in the chat, but thank you. Thank you for that. I'm honored, in fact.
The
that you're
pleasure's all
watching.
yours.
Juan?
What?
Do you look? I mean, I thought you wanted to say something. I heard you make a little commentary there.
No, I just said the pleasure's all yours.
Okay.
We miss you, Rania.
Do you, or are you just saying that? She's your number one advocate in this fake meme that you're somehow being held captive in the booth. So do you feel like your voice is gone?
Because she's advocating for me. So last week I was in trouble. This week she's in trouble.
Yeah. Where is she really?
Free Rania.
Thank you for that one. I'm sure she appreciates that as well. But yeah, no, it's definitely a very good reason for you, by the way, to go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, and also hit the bell so you can get alerts, because when Rania gets back, there's going to be a lot of great breakthrough news content from Cuba, and there's a lot of great content all the time. So hit subscribe, hit the bell, get the alerts. Make sure you go to patreon.com/breakthrough news, become a patron, help us out to the extent that you can. Follow us across all your social media platforms at BT Newsroom. We're also at breakthroughnews.org. But definitely subscribe and hit the bell. But we're going to move the show forward here into the anniversary of the day. Today's January 20th. 1 year ago was the inauguration of President Joseph Robinette Biden. So to talk about the first year of the Biden administration, we are very honored to be joined by Dr. Jodi Dean. Jodi, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me back. I'm delighted to get a chance to talk to you about all this.
No, well, we are delighted to have you. And before I ask you any questions, I just want to play a short clip for you, Jodi, of Biden's response yesterday to a query, basically, about how he was doing. I think we have the clip. I never really know what to do when you don't really, because you could come at any moment. So do you just sit in silence? Do you say something? You never really know what's right to do in that situation. But I just try to do the right thing. But we got it? Okay, let's do it.
I know some of my colleagues will get into some specific issues, but I wanted to zoom out on your first year in office. Inflation is up. Your signature domestic legislation is stalled in Congress. In a few hours from now, the Senate, an effort in the Senate to deal with voting rights and voting reform legislation is going to fail. COVID-19 is still taking the lives of 1,500 Americans every day, and the nation's divisions are just as raw as they were a year ago. Did you overpromise to the American public what you could achieve in your first year in office, and how do you plan to course correct going forward?
Why are you such an optimist? Look, I didn't overpromise, but I have probably outperform what anybody thought would happen. The fact of the matter is that we're in a situation where we have made enormous progress. You mentioned the number of deaths from COVID. Well, it was 3 times that not long ago. It's coming down. Everything's changing. It's getting better. Look, I didn't overpromise, but I think if you take a look at what we've been able to do, you'd have to acknowledge we made enormous progress.
Well, Jodi, there you have it. They've outperformed and made tremendous progress, according to Biden. Do you agree?
I don't agree. And I think that the majority of the people in the country don't agree. I mean, part of this whole 1 year anniversary is taking place in the context of his really abysmal approval numbers. So it seems like he hasn't been, not just seems, it's a fact, he hasn't been able to transmit what his optimism into something that can make the rest of the country feel optimistic at all. In fact, it's been the opposite, right? I mean, the Omicron variant and the increased numbers of cases that you see every day, the worries around masks and vaccinations. I mean, this is, no, I don't think anybody expected it to be this bad, but there's something just sort of like, I don't know, dotty or dense about being optimistic about that. right? I mean, are optimistic in that context. Like sometimes Biden likes to talk about, oh, we've gotten 75% or 3/4 of the country has had the first vaccine. And then also 65% have had both. We're lower than Cuba. We're lower than Vietnam. We're lower than Canada. Right, so like we're lower than China in vaccine rates. So it's hard, and also people know this. So it's hard to kind of be on the optimistic things look good bandwagon. It seems a little bit delusional.
I mean, Jodi, am I being hysterical, saying too much, going too far to say that it almost feels like when you look at 1 year of Biden and so little change, that capitalism is almost leading us on like a death march. I mean, I almost feel like I'm being so hyperbolic when I say things like that, but it just feels that way when you look at everything's happening and throw in climate change and everything else.
Yeah, well, over 800,000 people in our country have died. So I don't think it's hyperbolic to talk about the death march. When we think about all of the floods, the fires that are coming about with climate change, and the fact that Biden's not able to do anything about it. And I think that the real thing that we have to get a grip on, and that it's easy when there's all this media about what Biden's approval ratings or Biden's success is. He's part of a system, and he's part of a party, and he's part of a class, and that party and that system and that class is actually completely incapable of solving the problems that we face. So let's just use climate change, for example. Happily, the U.S. re-entered the Paris Climate Accords. That's really good. But, right after the recent COP that was held, COP26, what happens? The U.S. sells off more than 80 million acres of oil and gas concessions in the Gulf of Mexico. So where's that? And it's not, and like climate change isn't something you can do that. You can't just say, okay, we're going to have some good goals over here and then go and just do things that absolutely undermine those goals. So yes, he talks the right game on some things, but the action's not there. The action that we need, and the actions that we need are drastic. And that's what they're not capable of doing.
Well, and you mentioned it. I mean, you say he's part of a party and he's part of a class and he's part of a system. I mean, what should this tell us about the role of the Democrats? I mean, people obviously were very excited to get Trump out. There's no doubt about that. And allegedly the opposition is the Democrats. But, I mean, what does this say about the political choices or non-choices that we're given?
The Democrats clearly and in a coordinated fashion blocked Bernie Sanders. Right? They blocked the one person affiliated with their party who might have been able to try to at least start to usher in real change. And some people say, did Biden overpromise? I actually don't think he overpromised, because I always felt like he was run as the candidate which would say, we're gonna basically it's gonna be a kinder, gentler Make America Great Again. It was the same kind of backward looking. It's gonna be okay. You won't have a president who's on Twitter saying crazy stuff, and that's really all that the Democrats were promising. The president won't be on Twitter saying crazy stuff. We guarantee that. We'll have someone who represents the old way of doing things, old Washington, but that's not enough in the country that we have. That's not enough in the world that we have, a world with climate change and COVID and crazy inequality, particularly with these, giant tech billionaire barons sitting on trillions of dollars. And people know this. And so I think that, it's clearer every day that Biden is just a figurehead for a party that really is trying tooth and nail to hold on to a status quo that the rest of us know has already crumbled.
It makes me wonder too about just, I don't know what level, I don't know if you even assign blame like this, but what level of blame we assign to the media and others, because I think the point you make about sort of returning to the past is so true. And we even hear that a lot with COVID, right? Like the so-called return to normal. We need to return to normal. I mean, and of course, everyone wants to be out of the pandemic, but it almost feels that one of the main roles of the media is to continue to promote this like historical amnesia that 30 years ago or something, Congress was great, or that just before the pandemic, everything was fine. And so like, if you just go back to the normal, the pre-Trump normal, I guess we're saying, calling it now, that like everything will be fine, which, you know, is obviously something that's like easily proved not true. But if this is all you're getting.
Yeah, it's what's so wild about also and interesting about the way you put this, Eugene, is this looking backwards is also looking backwards at a past that's a fantasy that wasn't real. Right? It denies the real conflicts and disparities in this society. It denies the economic crises that have really affected everyone since, you know, we can say at least the past 20, maybe 30 years, the racial conflict, the role of and militarization of the police. So this looking backwards it's got this double thing. On the one hand, it looks back at a past that's not real, but two, it also shows us this ruling class and their media can't see a future, right? And this is why I actually think that Biden's popularity is so down. Or hasn't been able to rise. Is that people don't see a future for themselves, their families, you know, their jobs, the planet, right? Like it's the problem is this inability to give people a picture of, look, the world will be better and the world will thrive, and here's what it's going to look like. The ruling class can't do this, and the media, you know, the media reports that and reflects that. They can't do it either. I don't expect much better from the mainstream capitalist media. You know, they're just trying to sell their ads.
That's for sure. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the issue of the future. You are the author of the book, Communist Horizon. Is it time that we start to seriously have these conversations about, you know, socialism, communism, you know, not just generally like capitalism is bad, but starting to envision something different in a way that's concrete?
Oh, absolutely. You know, one of my one of the favorite things I've heard in the last few years was talking with some young people, and they're like, you know, my retirement plan is socialism. Right? They see that there's no, like, they're not going to get it from Social Security, not with a Congress and a ruling class that refuses to lift the limits on how much salary is going to, you know, how much money can go into it. Right? They're not going to get that. They don't expect to have any kind of retirement plan with the kinds of work that's on offer. So socialism is a vision that people have for the future. I think also more and more people here's one sort of weird thing. So, you know, the COP26, even as it was kind of a sellout and a failure, still lets us know that even the ruling class recognizes that planned and coordinated action is necessary. Right? They don't do it, but the whole program of it says, you know, the only way forward is going to be a way that where that's filled with cooperation and planning. And the U.S., particularly the U.S. capitalist class, stands in the way of that. So I actually think it's becoming clearer to everyone every day. Like when we think about the COVID crisis, like which countries have dealt with that the best? Right? It's been the socialist countries, the countries with leading communist parties. I mean, not everybody likes to hear that, right? They're like, oh no, you know, trying to lock down everyone. That's right. And that means that they've been able to stop the spread and not have to go through, you know, now 3 years of kind of constant death and constant uncertainty and sort of constant like inability to plan for what's going to happen next week or the week after. We don't know.
Well, you know, one thing is we're about to be sucked right back into the midterm elections, and I don't know what they're going to be saying, but it'll all boil down to vote for us and, you know, we'll save everything. And, you know, of course, people are always looking for avenues to make change, and, you know, there might be some candidates saying some decent stuff in different places. But, I mean, what's your message to people about what's really going to move the needle here? Because we're, I know, just about to hit this onslaught again of, you know, voting will save the world.
I actually think that there's not one person who cares at all about reproductive justice and women's reproductive choice who can fall for that. right? The Democrats have said for years and years, oh, vote for us, protect Roe v. Wade. Well, we've had Democrats in office. Trump was only president for 4 years. We've had Democrats in office, and now Roe v. Wade is under major threat. And we all know this, right, with these cases from Texas and Mississippi. So I think that we have a very clear, one of their talking points is always Roe v. Wade, and that's just gone. I think that people, if there's a local election or a congressional election where they can go out and talk to people and say, is this going to help us actually get a real social program? Like if Build Back Better in its initial conception had actually passed, that would have been a major achievement. And so to try to push those things is not fruitless, because it also helps people start to learn, all of this is within our grasp and we have to fight for it. This person running for Congress may not get it for us, but we spread the message that we can actually solve problems collectively. We just can't do it with this billionaire class that we have. We have to do it by actually a much more fundamental transformation. So the election's not going to do that, but it can be an opportunity for getting the messages out.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Jodi Dean, as always, really appreciate you being willing to give us some of your time and joining us on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much. Take good care.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just real quick, sorry, I missed this earlier, but Zach in the chat, and thank you for your donation, asking, has Biden fulfilled a single promise? All I've gotten from Biden is cancellation of my unemployment benefits. And yeah, to be honest with you, Zach, I'd like to know the answer to that question myself. I guess if we posed it to Biden, they'd probably send us back some long list of things they claim they would do that they did do. They're very good at that in government. But I think that the general point you're making is correct. There's so many things, from the $10,000 of canceling student debt. We already mentioned the descheduling of marijuana. Obviously, on foreign policy, where he didn't promise all that much, he's done the exact same thing except worse on Trump. So I think we can see on a very normal basis. Maybe actually, Zach, the answer to your question is that the cancellation of your unemployment benefits is Biden fulfilling a promise, because he said that we were going to go back to normal. We were going to turn everything back to normal pre-COVID, when the unemployment system was, completely decrepit and totally inadequate. And he has done that. Juan in the booth, you're back.
Yeah, man. It's crazy that it's been a year of Biden, honestly. Like, we were talking about this episode earlier, and I'm like, it's been a year.
Yeah.
Just like the lack of anything being done, the amount of promises. I think Biden did do one thing,
okay,
and is remind people that they can't put all their chips under the Democrats. Like it's like after 4 years of Trump, people were like, this is my self-care. I heard that a lot. This is my self-care. This is self-preservation. But this year has shown that with self-preservation is going to come through actual movement work, through actual change, and definitely not through the Democrats, because people are still dying at crazy numbers. People are still broke as hell, and none of the promises made have been kept.
Yeah. It's honestly shocking in a way. It's one thing to not do something you didn't promise to do, but things that are within your power through executive action that you did promise to do. It gives such a clear message of who the Democrats are, who Biden is. They have the White House, they have the House, they have the Senate, and they always say, if you give us a majority, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. They said last time they're going to send us $2,000 checks, didn't do that.
They said $600 plus what we're sending you is
right.
$2,000.
Right. If you add it up, we give you the money.
Add up the checks you got, the $600 you got from Trump, plus the $1,400 you got from us.
Yeah. He also has done nothing. I think Jodi made a very good point about the billionaires and the money they're making. It is the 2020, the best year ever, basically, for billionaires. 2021, getting close to topping it. Huge amounts of wealth. Biden has done nothing to dent that, didn't reverse the Trump tax cuts, that's for sure, and didn't do anything even below that to be able to, do anything to help the rich. I noted this many different times, that if you had taken the money that it was going to take to do the entire Build Back Better, I think it was, however many trillions of dollars, if you took that money exclusively from billionaires in America, every single billionaire would still be a billionaire. Now, a lot of them would have a lot less money, but they'd still be the richest people on the planet and never have to worry about anything for their life and the life of the next like 4 generations of their family, if not more. And it really is just stunning the lack of any attempt to address this. But
Yeah.
you know, it
No,
shows, as you said, we can't count on them.
No, I completely agree. And what they're doing, honestly, is sealing their own fate, because who's really gonna want to turn out like when the elections come out,
Yeah, that's a good
midterms,
point.
when it's re-election, like who's gonna really want to turn out after 4 years of nothing? And I'm there's no reason to believe that in the next, like, well, not even 4 years, it's been 1 year, but like that's what it's gonna end up being. It's gonna end up being 4 years of nothing.
Yeah.
I'll be very surprised. In fact, like the only thing that Biden has done is really like continue the war march
Yeah. Yeah. In a
with
huge
China,
way.
with Russia.
The sanctions on the blockade on Cuba, the basically fake Iran deal. I mean, where he took this ridiculous position. And listen, we could go down the list for forever and a day because there's so many things that he didn't do. And I would say Venezuela, where he's also been very hawkish.
Yeah.
Not that he really promised to do anything there, but nevertheless, obviously, he's continued these terrible
And not taking a
policies that hurt
stance
so
on
many people.
anything, really, right? Like when Rittenhouse verdict came, he's like, I think that's the correct thing. Like he's really done nothing. He's shown no kind of really motivation for people to stick behind them. I'm not surprised his approval rating hasn't gone up, because any opportunity to show that he can do something, he's done nothing.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there's a lot more we could say about this. There's a lot more we could say about all of the fantastic topics, which is exactly why if you're watching on YouTube, you should go ahead and hit that subscribe button and also hit the bell so you can get the alerts. But I think that is going to bring us to the end of our show this week. A little bit of a truncated show because my co-host Ron Yakalik, as I said, is in Cuba doing some great reporting for Breakthrough News. So be looking for that in the upcoming weeks. A lot of fantastic interviews and other content. Don't forget, you can go to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. That's patreon.com/Breakthrough News. Become a patron. Anything that you can help us with is greatly appreciated and helps push this work forward. And of course, we're at breakthroughnews.org, and we are also at BT Newsroom across all of your social media platforms. So as always, we'll be back with you next Thursday on The Freedom Side.
Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.